So last week I posted 3 eye looks with the new Makeup by Mario Master Mattes The Neutrals palette, and today I wanted to swatch out this palette and do some comparisons to some other neutral palettes in my collection. And the 2 palettes that I really want to compare this to are the Colourpop Stone Cold Fox and the Patrick Ta Major Dimension 3 palette. I'm going to start out by swatching the Mario palette on the left side of my arm, and I'm going to go in shade order all the way from M1 to M12. Redo that one. And what I learned about these shadows when I use them on my eyes is that they are very buildable shades, and I kind of recommend building them up when using them. And you can also see that they're kind of powdery as well, so I noticed when I used these shadows on my eyes and picked up the shades with the brush, I would get a lot of kickback, and I mean, it's not the worst thing in the world. It didn't make me get a lot of fallout, which was nice, but it can just make your palette a little messy looking. I am going over some of these swatches a few times to really build up the shade so we can see the color better. But because these shades are really buildable, I do think that makes it more of a beginner-friendly formula. It's not going to be one of those formulas where you pick up the shadow and it's just like way too much pigment at once and you don't really know what to do with it. It's very easy to work with. And the last 3 shades. Yeah, so you can see the fallout kind of happening on my arm here. Alright, so there are all the shades of the Makeup by Mario Neutrals palette swatched out. This palette really does lean like the perfect neutral. It is not too warm, it is not too cool, it really is just right in the middle. Now the first palette I want to compare this to is the Patrick Ta Major Dimension 3. If you watch my videos, I have been loving this palette ever since I got it. I think I bought it last December of 2023. I don't know if you can tell on camera, but if you look at the little imprint on the shadows, I've definitely gotten way more use out of the bottom row because I definitely just prefer these more neutral shades nowadays. You know, if you were to ask me back in like 2014 what shadows I would like to wear, it would be that top row with that warm kind of oranginess to them, but nowadays I definitely prefer shades like this, which is why I was very impressed with this Makeup by Mario palette. But I want to swatch out this Patrick Ta palette, probably mostly the cool toned row, just to see if there's any similar shades between the 2 palettes. So for M1 from the Makeup by Mario palette, you kind of have 2 options from Patrick Ta. This one is more of a stark white, and this one is more of like a creamy shade, so I'm actually going to swatch both of them. I'm going to start with the white. And just by picking up that Patrick Ta formula, it does feel a lot more, I guess, like buttery on my fingers, a little bit smoother. You can see how the shade in Patrick Ta is a lot more white than that first shade in the Mario palette. Let's swatch this more vanilla shade. And what I've learned with this Patrick Ta palette is that these shadows do pack quite a bit of a punch at first, so they are very pigmented with your first dip into the palette, which can be a little tricky for beginners. You know, I might as well just swatch out the whole palette, right? For that 3rd shade, I don't really think any of these are going to be a close match, but I'm just going to kind of keep going with this palette here. This shade right here from the Patrick Ta is my most used shade from the palette. For me, it's like the perfect kind of neutral transition shade. And let's swatch this one. Yeah, these shadows do feel a lot smoother to me. That one actually is a pretty close match to M5 from Mario. And I'm kind of going every other with the cool toned and the warm toned shades. I am gonna swatch this deep brown shade next to this deep brown shade from Mario, because those are gonna be pretty similar. And then these two shades in Patrick Ta do lean just so warm, so there's not gonna be any duplicates here, but I'm gonna go ahead and swatch them out. And then of course the black. After picking up these Patrick Ta shades, these ones are pretty powdery as well. There is a lot of kickback happening, so I just kind of blow those off of my palette. And then the Patrick Ta palette does have these two cream shades in here that you can use as like a cream eyeliner. That's typically how I use them. I think some people have used them as a cream base, but I just don't really do a deep eye where I would need those as a base. I guess I might as well swatch these out, right? The brown, and I'm gonna go right here, fill up this spot. And then the black. All right, so there are those two palettes swatched out side by side. I think even looking at the formulas, just the Patrick Ta shades look a lot smoother on my arms. But obviously the Patrick Ta palette does have these warmer shades in here that the Makeup by Mario palette does not have. So I think if you're someone that's trying to choose between these two palettes, you gotta look at what type of shades do you like to wear. Like I said with the Patrick Ta palette, I really don't use like these three warmer shades right here. I do use these two, and then this whole bottom row I do use. I do also use the cream black, and I think I've used the cream brown maybe once or twice. But looking at the Mario palette, I am someone that loves neutral shadows, so I can see myself using every single shade in this palette, and the shades were really easy to use in my first video with the palette. And while the formulas do feel a bit different, again, the Patrick Ta just kind of feels more creamier in a way. The Makeup by Mario ones are just a tad bit drier, but I don't really think one formula is better or worse than the other. Like I said, the Mario palette is kind of more buildable, a little bit easier to work with in the way that you're not going to get so much pigment right off the bat, that I think this formula would be a bit more beginner friendly. But I do think both of these palettes are great, and I really wanted to see these shades side by side, so I hope this was helpful. Okay, I went ahead and cleaned up my arm, and then I did re-swatch the Mario palette on the left side. The next palette I want to compare this to, I think is going to be a true dupe just looking at it, and that is the Colourpop Stone Cold Fox palette. Now, I love this Stone Cold Fox palette. I think Colourpop did a great job on it, and I highly recommend it. And opening up this palette, and I was looking at these two last night, and I was like, ooh, these look pretty dang close, but of course we got to swatch out the shades and see which shades are similar. I know that in this Mario palette, a lot of people are excited about this gray shade, and my eye just goes straight to this gray shade in the Colourpop palette. So let's go through and see what similar shades we can find. Now for this first light shade, we have Luxe and Dreamful. Dreamful is one of those matte shades that have a little bit of sparkle in it, but Luxe is a true matte. So I'm gonna swatch this one. Ooh, and that's swatching a lot more of like a true white, where again, the Mario one has a little bit of a creaminess to it. I wanted to add the Mario palette into frame here. So these next two shades right here, especially this one kind of has a little bit of like a yellowiness, kind of like a khaki-ness to it that I'm not seeing in this palette. But for this second shade, I'm kind of looking at Trip right here. So let's see what this one looks like. Okay, that's actually a lot closer than I thought. Looking at the pans, this one just looks like it has like a drop of peachiness to it. But swatching them out, they do look kind of close, don't they? Okay, so again, I'm not seeing a true dupe for this third shade, so I might skip it for now, I think. This is kind of tricky. There's like a couple shades that I think could be similar. I'm looking at this fourth one here. My first thought is this Quarry Day shade, but I think that's going to be deeper and is going to be more close to something like that shade. I am looking at this Enigma color. I don't know if it's going to be like a complete dupe, but I do want to swatch it out because it is a really pretty cool toned brown color. Let's just go next to that third shade. Oh wait, interesting. It's funny how like looking at the pans, they don't look that similar, but when I swatch it out, like it's not exact, but it's pretty dang close. Okay, so for this fourth one, I think I'm gonna go ahead and do Quarry Days. Let's just see what this looks like. Yes, like I expected, that Quarry Day shade, I'd say is a little bit closer to maybe this one, but again, not super exact. Now for this 5th shade, I'm kind of looking at this Fascinated one right here. It might be a little lighter, but let's just see. Oh yeah, this one has a bit more gray in it, but still kind of fits that cool toned neutral vibe. Should I re-swatch this shade to be that dupe? I think I'm just gonna go ahead and do that just to make it look kind of even. I think this M5 shade right here just has a little bit more yellow to it. But again, it's just like a drop of a shade difference. Now for this more like slightly pink neutral shade, I'm looking at Stranger right here. Yeah, that's pretty close. I think the one in the Mario palette might be a tad bit deeper. All right, so that was the pinky shade. Now this next one, I'm not seeing an exact shade that would be super duper close to it. I might skip that one for now and kind of come back to it. And then this brown shade, which is this one, has like a little bit more coolness to it. So I'm kind of looking at this one, but I do think this has more gray in it, so I don't think it's going to be exact, but let's just swatch it, shall we? I also think it's going to be a lot deeper. Yeah, definitely pulls more gray than brown. Now for the kind of more chocolatey deep brown, I'm going to swatch Fickle Fate. You know, these Colourpop shades are swatching really well too. Again, they are a little bit powdery, but not a big deal. All right, so for that one, I feel like the Colourpop one has a little bit more warmth to it. Now for the bluish gray shade, I just have to swatch this Rumor Mill. I think this is gonna be exact. Let's see. That swatched horribly. I'm like looking at these so close up right now. I feel like the Rumor Mill just has like a tad bit more blue in it. Again, I feel like I'm just saying these shades are just ever so slightly different, but I feel like on the eyes, these two shades would look so similar. And then of course the black shade, I'm gonna swatch Rock Bottom. Oh, it actually swatched really nicely. Okay, so there's only one shade I didn't really find something super close to, but looking at the Colourpop palette, I kind of want to swatch out this bold type shade because it is kind of more a really neutral leaning grayish brown. And I think that would just kind of complete this little color palette right here. Again, I'm not swatching this because it's similar to this one, just because I feel like it fits the vibe. All right, so there's the Makeup by Mario palette swatched out next to the Colourpop Stone Cold Fox palette. Like I've said throughout all of these swatches, most of the shades aren't like exact color dupes, but I think they're very close. But I think if you're someone that has the Colourpop Stone Cold Fox palette, you definitely don't need the Makeup by Mario one, because you are getting a lot of similar shades, but then you're also just getting way more shades in the Colourpop palette, and you're getting a mixture of shimmers and satins and a couple like kind of glittery shades in here. You can definitely create way more different looks with the Colourpop palette, and like we have so many shades I didn't even swatch. You know, we have these more kind of rosy shades down here, this whole column of shades right here, these kind of more nude shades. Like there's a lot of shades I didn't get to. How much is the Stone Cold Fox? Okay, so yeah, the Colourpop palette is $35, whereas the Mario palette is $50. You're getting way more shades, way more types of shades in this palette. So I mean, if you're interested in the Mario, I would kind of say get the Colourpop one. Unless you only wear matte shadows and you need something smaller, then get Mario. But I don't know. Those are pretty dang close. Lastly, I just wanted to show the Makeup by Mario palette next to a few other kind of neutral leaning palettes that I have in my collection, but I'm not going to do full swatches because I don't think they're like really dupes or like super comparable, but just kind of have some similar vibes. So first I pulled out my Natasha Denona Glam palette. Now this is the most kind of neutral, cool tone leaning palette from Natasha. And I'm just going to point out any shades that I think are similar. For the first lightest shade, you might think this transition one is close, but this one does actually have a hint of gray to it. And I think for this blend shade, you could get something kind of similar, maybe mixing like these two shades together. Then we have Smoke here that's going to be pretty close to this brown shade. And then we have this Lash Line shade, which is not completely black, but it's also not gray. It also has a tiny bit of brown mixed into it. It's kind of like, I don't know, maybe like these three shades mixed together almost. But then of course in the Glam palette, you do have a bunch of shimmery shades to work with. Next is the Huda Beauty Pretty Grunge palette, which was my favorite eyeshadow palette of 2023. So for this palette, I can see some similarities with these three matte shades. This kind of more pinky matte shade is pretty close to Love Anarchy. And then this Hope is really neutral like the brown in Mario. And then this Rise Up shade could be pretty close to this one. And then of course there is a matte black in both palettes. But with the Huda Beauty palette, you kind of have a mixture of more kind of brown and neutral shades with some kind of more rosy, a little bit purple leaning shades as well. And then of course there are some really gorgeous shimmers in this palette. The last palette I wanted to look at side by side is the Natasha Denona I Need a Nude, which was a huge hit of last year. And I wanted to point out that these matte shades in the I Need a Nude palette do lean more taupey. I think if anything, they would look a little more similar to these shades from Mario. And then we have this fair shade, which is pretty close to like a mixture of these two. And then of course the dark brown shades look pretty similar as well. But again, in the Natasha palette, you are getting some really gorgeous shimmers, especially these kind of more lid toppery shades right there. So I hope this video was helpful and that it helped you decide on whether or not you need this Makeup by Mario Neutrals palette in your collection. Again, if you want to see my 3 eye looks I did with this palette already, I'll link that video down below for you. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.